He also refers to the absence of an effective internal control system in the Greek public sector, and to the lack of adequate powers in the hands of the auditing authorities that would permit them to focus more on the efficient use of public funds. And this is a problem that has been long-standing. I mean, I spent 6 years at the European Court of Auditors, and I was tasked with the job of preparing the annual report and coordinating the work of the various audits that were being done. And probably during my time in every report, there was a specific mention of Greece and the problems it had in its administrative system. And invariably, the Commission would stop paying out the funds. Then the Greek authorities would promise to put in place corrective action. There would be a plan. This plan would be launched. The Commission then would find itself in a position that it shouldn't perhaps keep on the tap closed, so they would start, the funds start flowing again. And after 3 years, when the whole situation is re-examined, the problem tended to persist. And this was part of the problem in the governance structure of the European Union, I think. It was not easy to bring a state that is constantly not following the normal practice to task. There are decisions which are unanimous, and we all appreciate that. But when it came to trying to discipline a member state, this wasn't easy. And in fact, in some of the changes that we have seen, there has been a drive to try and find ways of ensuring that this impasse is not created again. So, you know, it wasn't just the Greek administrative system, and there's a lot that can be said about its faults, or the Greek political system, but it was also about the EU system, which, with its own well-intentioned rules of ensuring that each sovereign state has a say and so on, had also difficulties in trying to manage this kind of situation. Well, the trend has been, therefore, to ensure through a number of measures, and I will not go through all the details, as I said, I've summarized them in my paper too, which are trying basically to do a number of things. There's the fiscal compact, which is trying to introduce and reinforce what was initially in the Stability and Growth Pact, which is basically that if you're using a common currency, then each member state is not free to borrow as much as they like with that currency. There have to be limits, and these limits have to be related to the capacity of that country to repay those loans. Loans cannot be regarded as forever loans, never ending, rolling over. You can roll over up to a certain amount, but beyond a certain level, it is quite clear that the dynamics of debt can become unsustainable. So there's been quite, I think, a very impressive and good reinforcement of these mechanisms, which sometimes are, stepping on the sensitive elements of the autonomy of each member state and so on. In fact, not all member states have agreed to the fiscal compact, although in principle it is actually saying that you can't have as much debt as you would like to have. You have to follow certain procedures. You have to have a balanced budget over the medium term, a structurally balanced budget over the medium term, because otherwise you risk getting out of balance, getting into a situation which is not sustainable. And the experience shows that these situations can grow a bit over time. Once they hit, it is not easy to unwind them. It is not easy to go back and repay the debt. It takes time. So, in a sense, there is this whole new mechanism now which is in place, which is starting to, of course, be at least more restrictive in certain aspects. Another element has to do with competitiveness. And this is, when I speak about the Maltese case, I will also speak a little bit about this aspect. Competitiveness has often been not given enough attention. And there could be practices in the labor market, for instance, lack of competitiveness in other markets, which the public sector itself, the efficiency level of the public sector, which, when you put them all together, leave a whole economy in great difficulty in trying to, at the end of the day, earn its living, whether it's through services, financial services, tourism services, manufacturing. At the end of the day, whether in the euro or outside the euro, the inflows and the outflows into an economy have to somehow balance. You can run away from the truth for a certain period of time, but you can't run away forever. And to make them balance, you need to have a system which can stand on its own 2 feet. This is how I define competitiveness. If the system is falling behind and is unable to meet its own requirements in terms of its imports through its exports of goods and services, over time, this will lead to an inability to maintain the situation. And this inability will transform itself in a number of ways. Outside the currency union, you get huge devaluations, you get high inflation, you get a destruction of wealth of those holding money, and it's a tax on the system, basically. In a currency union, one of the problems you find is that that member state will not be able to borrow anymore at reasonable rates. This is a new thing which departed from what I mentioned earlier, when the interest rates were all almost reasonably close together because everything was regarded as having a similar risk profile. It does not have a similar risk profile. Anybody who had been following the problems that were seen in some countries, well, it was clear that this was not the case. And unfortunately, I think there was a collective misjudgment about the situation. And now we have this reaction of trying to do something about this issue. So there are measures now which are requiring countries to report on certain, what they are called, macroeconomic imbalances. So over every now and then, I mean, we used to have it when we had the IMF reports every year or every 2 years, but now it's being done by the Commission as well. So they would look at certain aspects of the economy, at the wage-setting process, at the competitiveness in the local market. What could be out of line is brought to the attention of the government, and recommendations are made. And in my opinion, this is a very healthy exercise because it, in the future, will hopefully prevent a country finding itself in a situation such as like Greece did, with a situation where it's not earning enough, it cannot borrow anymore, and it has a problem. And to make matters worse, there were certain policies that were adopted by, say, the Greek government that expanded massively the public sector. Before, not this last election, the election before, public sector employment was increased by something like 300,000. Of course, this has to be pushed back, and this is causing a lot of pain. And how it's done is not as straightforward or as simple, and often hurts the wrong people and the wrong groups in society. So it takes time for these competitive enhancing measures to reap the so-called macroeconomic dividends, including more rapid economic growth, faster employment growth. As a result, the rapid correction of the excessive debt ratio as demanded by financial investors, often requires a sharp fiscal correction, which leads to a slowdown in economic activity. In other words, the distress caused by austerity measures is relatively immediate, while the benefits need a longer period of time to materialize. One has to recognize that in the current circumstances, the pursuit of a lower deficit by financially stressed countries is inevitable and brings about a short-term slowdown in the economy. The issue that arises is whether it would be possible to alleviate the negative effects on incomes and employment. Some of the impact may be alleviated through a judicious mix of government spending and revenue options, so as to reduce the depth and duration of the slowdown. For example, an increased recourse to EU cohesion and solidarity funds may help alleviate the structural adjustment necessary and make the economy of the program countries more competitive at the same time. Given the extent of the downturn in some member states, this option is likely to require a strengthening of the EU budget, which in turn needs to be financed. However, not all member states are in a stressed environment, and it may be possible to consider other financing options, especially where bond interest rates in some member states are rather low, even below the inflation rate. EU-level solidarity and cohesion assistance may prove a crucial catalyst to the required structural changes. Okay, another part of my presentation dealt with the financial sector and how the governance is being strengthened. And there are a number of aspects which have led to this strengthening. On the financial stability side, European authorities have strengthened the financial sector surveillance framework. The European System of Financial Supervisors, which also includes the European Systemic Risk Board, the so-called ESRB, is a new supervisory architecture requiring the national supervisory authorities to cooperate with the European supervisory authorities in the identification and analysis of systemic risks.